Chapter 3242. Lin Cece lowered her head and said again, "Really, Guze, I can stay with you for a few more days." Guze looked at her and took a few steps back. He said coldly, "Lin Cece, is this how you see yourself and us?" He held her hand. "Do you think I gave you 80 million to buy sex?" Lin Cece smiled bitterly. "Isn't it? President Gu bought me for a month. Did you just look at me and not sleep?" Guze narrowed his eyes and stared at her. After a long time, he sneered, "Lin Cece, you're really good." He took 2 steps back. "Didn't you say you would stay with me for 2 more days?" "No need, just once now. I'm going to be discharged in a while. It's only an hour. If you're willing, go to my ward." With that, he turned around and left. Lin Cece was still standing there. After a long time, she walked to his ward quietly. He closed the door and stood at the window of the ward. His voice was hoarse and low. "Take off your clothes." Lin Cece's back was against the door. She pursed her lips and looked at him helplessly. Then she began to take off her clothes one by one. She dropped them on the ground one by one. In the end, there was nothing left. The cool air made her pores tremble slightly. She was a little cold and hugged herself. "Guze, is this okay?" Guze turned his head and looked at her with reddened eyes. After a long time, he said hoarsely, "Lin Cece, I really want to strangle you." She didn't say anything. She leaned against the door and didn't move at all. It was as if she was waiting for him to taste her. Guze really came over. He hugged her, kissed her, and rubbed her angrily. But in the end, he didn't take her. Letting go of her body, he said in a sad voice, "Lin Cece, you should go." She lowered her head and said yes. Guze looked at her. He wanted to hug her so much in the past, and now he wanted to kill her. She really knew how to escape unscathed and how to make him let her go. When she picked up her clothes and put them on with trembling hands, he suddenly asked softly, "Lin Cece, have you really never thought of turning back this month? Have you never thought of living with me?" She glanced at him and said very softly, "No, not even once." He closed his eyes slightly, and his voice was almost a sigh. Lin Cece bit her lip. "Yes, not even once." Guze took a few steps back and walked toward the window. He lit a cigarette and said indifferently, "Go. You can continue to live in the house. I won't move over. Just take it as a gift from me." "No need." Lin Cece's voice was a little choked. "And thank you, President Gu." She left, took $80 million, and took away his heart. Guze felt that Lin Cece's heart had been eaten by a dog for her to leave without a conscience. Later, when he visited the villa, she did not come back to live there. Everything had been moved away. There were only some daily necessities he had bought that day and a box of T-shirts he had bought. He stood in the bedroom and looked at it in his hand for a long time. In the end, he threw it into the trash can. He knew that Lin Cece wasn't with Yimu Bai. That day at the hospital, she probably put on a show for him. For some reason, Guze wanted to believe that was the case. He went to work and got off work every day. He didn't have time to have a girlfriend. In fact, it wasn't that he didn't have time, he just didn't want to. Chapter 3243. Perhaps in his heart, there would only be one candidate for his wife, but she didn't want him. That was what Guze was thinking when he was going on a blind date with a pretty good woman. He couldn't smoke in the elegant restaurant, so he leaned back in his chair lazily and played with his lighter. The pretty woman was an artist who had won several awards, but Guze heard that she had bought it with money. However, regardless of whether she had bought it or not, the woman in front of him was very good-looking, and her business was doing well. However, he just couldn't get interested. He just couldn't hold such a good woman in his arms. The woman was talking, and he looked around in boredom. Suddenly, his gaze was attracted by a certain place. It was Lin Cece. It was early autumn, and she was wearing a black suit. Her long black hair was slightly curled, and she had a black hairpin on her forehead. She looked exquisite and capable. She was sitting with a very decent man, and they seemed to be discussing something. Guze's eyes fell on her face, and he looked at her quietly. The woman saw that he was a bit distracted, so she couldn't help calling him, "Guze." Guze came back to himself and smiled, "Go on." But after a while, he was distracted again and looked at Lin Cece. Perhaps it was because his gaze was too intense, but Lin Cece also noticed him. She turned her head and her gaze fell on his face. She smiled shyly. Guze made up his mind and said to the woman, "Let's go again next time. I have a friend who's going to say hi." The woman probably hadn't expected him to be so rude, so she quickly said, "I can go with you. It's a female friend." Guze gave her a comforting smile. The woman didn't say anything because she knew that a man like Guze needed a well-behaved woman. If she disobeyed him, there wouldn't be a next time. However, she didn't know that the women who went on blind dates with Guze wouldn't have a next time. After the woman left, Guze was still sitting there, looking at Lin Cece. She understood what he meant, so when she finished talking with him, she walked over, put her briefcase aside, and sat down. Blind date? Guze didn't deny it. "What about you?" "I'm just trying to make a living." Lin Cece smiled lightly. "You don't mind treating me to some dessert, do you?" Guze smiled and waved to the waiter to bring one over. His eyes fell on her face again. "What are you doing now?" Without waiting for her to answer, he immediately asked, "I heard from his secretary that you donated the 80 million yuan to the children's fund." The waiter brought the desserts over. Lin Cece lowered her head and scooped a small spoonful. Then she smiled and said, "That's right. I'm showing my love and also buying some peace of mind." Guze looked at her little face and then thought of their child. He whispered, "Cece, I'm very sorry about that child. You didn't know it back then." Lin Cece smiled faintly. "We were not fated to be together." After saying that, she pursed her lips and didn't want to talk about it anymore. "You haven't told me what you're doing now," Guze said softly. Lin Cece replied softly, "I'm doing software. It's kind of my old profession. Don't ask me why I'm not in the entertainment industry anymore." She looked up. Bai Xiuli is always looking for trouble with me. "Do you think I could survive?" Guze smiled. "Isn't it good? This profession is better than the entertainment industry. I don't have to drink with people every day." Chapter 32:44. Guze looked at her and suddenly said, "If it's tough and you need someone to take care of you, Lin Cece, will you consider me?" Lin Cece looked at him and said in a very low voice, "Are you sure?" Guze pursed his lips and smiled faintly. Lin Cece also smiled and raised her eyebrows. "What do you want me to be? Is it an innocent woman? Or is it your lover? Or is it your wife?" Guze lit a cigarette and looked at her quietly. "It depends on what you think." At this moment, the waiter immediately came over and said awkwardly, "Mr. Gu, this is a non-smoking area." Guze glanced at him, put out the cigarette, and looked at Lin Cece. "I'll send you." Lin Cece looked down and said, "I'll take a taxi myself." Guze didn't say anything else. He held her hand and walked out. "Guze." Lin Cece called his name, but he held her hand and walked out. When they reached the parking lot, Guze opened the car door and sent her into the car. He started the car and looked at her sideways. "Are you still living in that apartment?" Lin Cece looked at him. "Have you investigated me?" Guze smiled and didn't answer. He started the car and continued driving until they reached her apartment. He stopped the car and looked at her. "Aren't you going to invite me upstairs for a glass of water?" Lin Cece looked at him for a long time and sighed. "Guze, it's really impossible for us." Guze smiled. "At least let me see how you're doing." He looked up. "Which floor?" This apartment was a 6-story bungalow. It was in a good location and it was not too old. It was one of the better houses in B City and Lin Cece could afford it. Lin Cece looked at him, pursed her lips, and followed him in. 5th floor. Lin Cece's voice was very soft. "I don't have coffee there," Guze said calmly. "Plain water is fine." Lin Cece looked at him and pressed the elevator button. Guze smiled and said nothing. When they reached her apartment, she closed the door. "The place is a little small. Take a seat. I'll get you some water." As soon as she finished speaking, he grabbed her hand and her body was in his embrace. Without a word, he lowered his head and kissed her. The kind of deep, deep kiss, as if he could kiss the depths of her soul. Lin Cece almost couldn't stand still and stumbled as he pressed her onto the sofa. When he was done kissing her, Lin Cece gasped and asked, "What do you want?" Guze looks down at her. "Lin Cece, if I say to be my wife, are you willing?" Lin Cece looked down. "I said it's impossible between us." "Why is it impossible?" "You're not with Lao Bai." He stared into her eyes. wanting an answer. Lin Cece's voice was very soft. Because there is no more love, Guze. Many things have worn away the love between us. I no longer have the strength to love another person. Guze stared at her. Lin Cece pursed her lips. I'm very good now. It's really good to be alone. Guze, please let me go, really. Guze's gaze was deep. Lin Cece, have you thought it through? Now that there is no love, we can still continue. We still have a lifetime to love each other. If you're not sure, then let me tell you, I love you. She was stunned and looked at him blankly. Chapter 32:45. This was a little different from what she had expected. After they left the hospital, he should have hated her. Could it be that after knowing that she wasn't with Lao Bai, he changed his mind and wanted to be with her again? This wasn't the Guze she knew. However, he looked so serious. When he said that he would take care of her, she was really moved and wavered. Lin Cece pursed her lips. Just as she was about to speak, the apartment door opened and Yi Mubai's voice came from outside. Cece, you're back. I'm so tired. I'll take a shower first. Do you want to give me a massage? Lin Cece closed her eyes. Lao Bai, why was he here at this time? Although he would shamelessly come over to stay for a couple of days, didn't he just leave a few days ago? The atmosphere was a little strange. She looked up at Guze, and Guze looked at Yi Mubai at the door. Yi Mubai looked at them, confused. However, he still took off his coat and walked in. Guze is here. He stood next to Guze. What's going on between you and Cece? Guze slowly let go of Lin Cece and stood face to face with Yi Mubai. The two men sized each other up. Lin Cece was still lying on the sofa, looking at them with her chest heaving up and down. After a long while, Guze said softly, Lin Cece, I was thinking too highly of myself. His gaze paused on her face. Then he took his coat and walked out. Lin Cece was lying on the sofa, but she still looked at his back. However, he didn't turn back. Lao Bai stood quietly and asked softly, Did I come at the wrong time? Lin Cece shook her head and looked at Lao Bai. She sat up weakly. You came at the right time. I didn't know how to reject you. Lao Bai looked at her. Are you going to reject me? No. Lin Cece smiled faintly. Don't joke around. Don't you want to take a shower? Soon, but you're not allowed to wear my slippers when you come out. What kind of hobby did an old man like to squeeze her fluffy white slippers? Did he still have a young girl's heart? Yi Mubai wanted to say something, but hesitated. In the end, he sighed softly. Cece, why don't we just make do with it? She glared at him. Are you itching for a beating again? Hurry up and take a bath, or I'll throw you out. You're homeless now, and I'm the only one who can take you in. The girls in five-star hotels are much cuter than you. Maybe if I coax them a little, I'll be able to find one to warm my bed. General Bai snorted softly and obediently went to take a shower. Lin Cece looked in White's direction and was a little stunned. She didn't know if she would regret not explaining to Guze today and not choosing Guze, but at this moment she didn't regret it. The conflict between him and her wouldn't disappear after a few months. She walked to the balcony, where she could see the place where Guze parked his car. She opened the blinds a little and saw Guze standing beside the car. He seemed to be smoking, but after lighting the cigarette, he put it out. Then, he took out another cigarette and lit it up. He smoked over and over again, and his expression didn't look good. Lin Cece looked at him quietly and pursed her lips. At this moment, Guze's gaze turned to her side, and it was as if he had seen her. Actually, people outside couldn't see what was inside, but Lin Cece still felt a little guilty, so she immediately closed the blinds. She turned around and saw Lao Bai standing there, looking at her thoughtfully. Chapter 32:46. Lao Bai smiled and walked over to open the blinds. Guze is here. Lin Cece's eyebrows twitched. What did you say? I lied to you. Lao Bai smiled slightly. Lin Cece ran over and hit him hard. Lao Bai, you're too despicable. He let her hit him and said softly, How can I force out your true feelings if I'm not despicable? Lin Cece suddenly withdrew her hand and looked at Lao Bai. After a while, she looked away. I told you that we have to start over. Lao Bai sighed. Cece, didn't you mean anything other than 80 million in the 1-month agreement between you and Guze? Lin Cece took a step back and wanted to escape, but Lao Bai grabbed her hand and didn't allow her to escape. He just gently pulled her into his arms. Perhaps other men and women hugged each other affectionately, but Lao Bai and Lin Cece didn't. She lay in his arms, feeling embarrassed, as if she had been seen through. Yimu Bai's voice was a bit depressed. Cece, don't you have any thoughts of reminiscing and reliving the past? Lin Cece's fingers tugged at the clothes on his shoulder, and she bit her lip. Lao Bai stopped talking. Lao Bai turned his face away and looked at her. Others couldn't see it, but only he could see that Cece had never walked out of it, whether it was love or hate for Guzay. If it hadn't been for that child, they might have gotten over it. But creating a child was something a woman couldn't get over for the rest of her life. Lao Bai knew that he had lost to that child. He didn't want to force her, but she couldn't walk out of it. How could they talk about a future? Some thorns hurt even when he looked at them, and he couldn't help but want to pick them out for her. She was in pain now, but fortunately, he was with her. Cece, if you can't forget, go find him. Lao Bai's voice was low and hoarse. Be brave and face your heart, okay? Lin Cece leaned her face on his shoulder and shook her head. Then she put her arms around his neck, as if she had made up her mind about something. She leaned over and kissed Yimu Bai. His body froze. He didn't expect her to be like this. Lin Cece's voice whispered softly beside his lips. Old Bai, will you reject me? At this moment, his body sat on the sofa, and she sat in his arms. She took off her coat, revealing a very thin dress underneath. She held him, and he was a normal man, and soon his body surrendered. Cece. Yimu Bai's lips moved to the back of her ear. So what if we have sex? If you want to be with me, think about it carefully, and we can do it now. If I'm just a tool for you to forget about Guzay, then we can still be very good friends. Friends who can sleep on the same bed without anything happening. Lin Cece didn't care. She seemed to have made up her mind and moved over to block his lips. Yimu Bai sighed softly. She was being willful, because he doted on her and liked her. In fact, he was also a normal man. How could he not have emotions? She was simply playing with fire. As long as he didn't control them, it would be real. But what about in the future? After they were done, she still couldn't forget about Guzay. Lao Bai was very clear about this. He also knew that to walk into a woman's heart, he had to walk into her why. But he liked Cece, and he didn't dare to gamble that they would really have a future after doing it. He was afraid that Cece would regret it. Once they did it, they would have crossed the bottom line, and there would be no turning back. Chapter 32:47. Lin Cece kissed Lao Bai indiscriminately. Lao Bai endured it, but did not respond. After a while, he chuckled softly and lay flat on the bed. He looked down at her and said gently, Cece, if you keep kissing me like this, I might not be able to get it up for the rest of my life. How could he not know that she was just a little fragile now? She kissed him, but only kissed him and kissed him, nothing else. If she really wanted to have sex with him, he wouldn't be able to control himself. He sighed and reached out to stroke her slightly curly hair. She was like a child now, venting all the fear, nervousness, and hurt in her heart. Slowly, Lin Cece stopped kissing him and just hugged him. She hugged him gently and then cried. She leaned over his shoulder and whispered, I'm sorry. Yimu Bai smiled gently and reached out to wipe her tears. He whispered, what do you have to be sorry for? We just didn't fall in love. If you want to say sorry, Cece, I'm sorry. I came late. Actually, it was him who had been watching her from behind, hesitating. If he had confessed to her earlier and told her that he liked her, then she wouldn't have liked Qin Shun. Then there wouldn't have been any hurt later, and she wouldn't have met Guzay. Even if they had met, she and Guzay would have been complete strangers. But life was so strange. One wrong step, and it would continue to be wrong. He was hugging her now, but nothing could really happen. If it did happen, it would be the biggest hurt to her. Yimu Bai's heart was a little moved. He reached out and hugged her, burying his face in her neck. He finally said, Cece, I'm sorry. She didn't understand, but that was enough. As long as he knew, they hugged for a long time like friends, but more like family. He asked her if one day they could hug and have sex naturally. She said, if that's the case, Lao Bai will get married. Lao Bai only stayed here for 2 days. He was busy during the day and could only see her at night. Later, he moved back to the main residence of the Yi family. It was the Yi family's head's idea because it was Yi Mubai's mother's 60th birthday. Therefore, no matter how busy his eldest and youngest sons were, they had to go home early. As soon as Yi Mubai's car arrived at the parking lot, Bai Shuali ran out of the living room and leaned against the door of his car. Yi Mubai sat in the car for a long time, then opened the door with a sigh. He couldn't avoid it either way. As soon as he opened the door, he received 2 slaps on his face. Yi Mubai, you bastard. After hiding for a few months, you finally showed up. Yi Mubai reached out his hand and touched his face. Seeing that Bai Shuali had lost a lot of weight, his heart ached. Ah, how did that big brother of his torment every night? Bai Shuali used to be so well-nourished, but now she was really haggard. So, Yi Mubai coughed lightly and said in a caring tone, "Surely, is my brother easy to get along with?" "Get along my ass." Bai Shuali glared at him. The anger in her heart from hitting him just now had dissipated a little. At this moment, she felt a little wronged again. She had always been willful. She had hugged Yi Mubai in the Yi family's mansion. Yi Mubai felt helpless. He wanted to push her away, but she cried fiercely. It was the kind that cried fiercely, like a wronged child. In addition, she had lost a lot of weight. Yi Mubai always had some feelings for her. They grew up together, so he couldn't bear to push her away. But when he looked up, he saw his big brother standing on the balcony on the 2nd floor, holding a cigarette in one hand and looking at them quietly. Chapter 32:48. Yi Mulin's gaze made Yi Mubai let go almost immediately. Bai Shuali was going to kill him. As soon as he let go, Bai Shuali was stunned for a moment. Then she turned her head and followed Yi Mubai's gaze. She also saw Yi Mulin, but as soon as she saw him, the fire in her heart flared. That bastard! He was so hateful. She hugged Yi Mubai stubbornly and looked at her husband provocatively. She liked Yi Mubai and didn't like his work machine. Yi Mubai closed his eyes and sighed. Dead. He coughed lightly and said, "Shuali, control yourself. There's so many people watching." Not only did Bai Shuali hug him, but she also wanted to kiss him. Yi Mubai wanted to push her away, but Bai Shuali fell into Yi Mubai's arms. The eldest brother of the Yi family held her easily and looked at his brother. "You just came back?" Yi Mubai didn't feel comfortable. "Yes, I just came back." Yi Mulin's voice was calm. "Grandpa is waiting for you in the study. You go first." "Okay," Yi Mubai said and looked at Bai Shuali. Bai Shuali shouted, "Don't you dare leave. Is he going to stay here and have sex with you?" Yi Mulin's voice was cold, and then he signaled his brother to leave first. After they left, he held his wife and walked upstairs to the bedroom. As soon as they entered, he threw her away as if she was a germ. Then he locked the door. Bai Shuali almost suffocated. "Yi Mulin, you bastard, what do you want?" He leaned against the door and looked at her quietly. Then he took out his belt slowly. "I want to teach my cheating wife a lesson." Bai Shuali couldn't believe it. She turned around on the big cylindrical bed and screamed, "Yi Mulin, you want domestic violence. Don't forget that you studied law. You're a lawyer. You know the law and you're breaking the law. In this family, I am the law." He snorted, walked a few steps forward and dragged her over. Bai Shuali screamed, "You can't do this. I will call for help." Seeing that he was unmoved, she swallowed and said, "I will really call for help. When you're excited in bed, you will also scream for help." A mocking expression appeared on Yi Mulin's face as he tied up the man who was against him. He was really abusing her. Bai Shuali kept screaming, and her cries for help were so loud that the whole villa could hear her. However, from the elders of the Yi clan to the servants, they all pretended not to hear, or perhaps they were used to it. They all knew that this was the boss lecturing his wife. Bai Shuali laid on the ground, her face full of tears. "Yi Mulin, I will definitely tell my dad that you bullied me." "Okay, record a video of me hitting you and show it to your dad. And, or should I tell him that I forced you to make love to me? And?" Yi Mulin had already stopped. He sat on the bed and gently caressed the place where he had hit her. He would really hit her, but he would never hurt her. It was just a way to teach a child a lesson. She couldn't tell others. If she said that a husband spanking her was considered domestic violence, no one would believe it. They would only say that it was fun. In this aspect, the boss of the Yi clan was very good at it as a lawyer. Bai Shuili almost exploded when she heard what he said. This bastard. Chapter 32:49. From then on, she felt that Yi Mulin was poisonous. She had to get rid of this man, and the best way was to sleep with Yi Bai. The Yi family couldn't stand such humiliation, and they would definitely divorce her. Now she couldn't care less about Yi Bai. Leaving Yi Mulin was the most important thing for her. Yi Mulin's body was over her, and she knew that he was going to make endless love again. Bai Shuili screamed, "Yi Mulin, you bastard! If you don't love me, why are you pressing on me every day? I hate you. Go away. Do you hear me?" They had been married for a few months, and he didn't make any progress in bed. He was still as forceful as before. Yi Mulin didn't have any gentle kiss or slow pace. He liked to be forceful, as if he would be satisfied until she cried and begged him. He was a pervert, but it was useless no matter how she resisted. The more she resisted, the more she scolded him, and the fiercer he bullied her, as if he could break her. Bai Shuili knew that she should be obedient, so that her life would be better. But she hated him, so she didn't want to be obedient. She cursed him until the pain came and left her speechless. This bastard. Later, it became much more harmonious. No matter how much she hated him, she was satisfied in his arms every time. The Yi family didn't care about the private life of this couple. Bossy could come whenever he wanted, mainly because he was angry with Bai Shuili. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the dining table upstairs had been removed. Yi Mulin took a shower, and when he came out, he saw that Bai Shuili was taking medicine. That was the contraceptive pill, which she took every day. His pupils constricted, and he walked over slowly with only his bathrobe. He took the medicine from her hand and threw it into the dustbin without thinking. "You don't want to have children? Yi Mulin, aren't you afraid that a man like you won't be able to have children?" Bai Shuili was so angry that she scolded him directly. But as soon as she scolded him, Yi Mulin's expression sank. He pinched her chin with one hand, and the strength was so strong that it seemed to crush her bones. His voice was so deep that it dripped water. "Say it again, huh?" Bai Shuili bit her lip and looked up. "I'll tell you." Before she could even finish, he gave her a light slap on the face. It was not a slap, but a pat. He then let go of her and said in a cold tone, "Let me reiterate, Bai Shuili. Mubai is my bottom line. Don't you dare try to make me a cuckold. Otherwise, I'll crush you to death. Also respect the elders in the family. Otherwise, I will personally teach you in bed." Bai Shuili wanted to scold him again, but when she saw his expression, she shrank back and didn't say anything. After a while, she said, "I don't want to have children. I need a child." Yi Mulin suddenly thought of something. "Or give birth to a child, and I can set you free." He didn't want to get married, but if Bai Shuili gave birth to a child, he would consider letting her go. Bai Shuili was startled. She then cursed out loud, "Yi Mulin, dream on." He took off his bathrobe and began to put on his clothes. With a cold expression, he said, "Then you can stay in the Yi clan." Chapter 32:50. Bai Shuili was still lying on the bed. She tilted her head and looked at Yi Mulin. Suddenly, tears fell from the corner of her eyes. Yi Mulin looked at her without much expression on his face. Bai Shuili didn't want him to see her cry. She turned her face to the side and smiled gently. "Yi Mulin, I know you hate me. You look down on a rice worm like me. You look down on me for not doing my job properly. But if I don't do anything, I will eat your rice. If you look down on me, then divorce me. What's wrong with you sleeping with me every day?" She wiped her tears. "You think you're so great? You're a lawyer. Yes, you're busy. Yes, but I'm not born to be your accessory. Are you done?" Yi Mulin was already dressed. He said coldly, "If you didn't do anything to Lin Cece at the wedding, I wouldn't have to clean up your mess." Bai Shuili jumped up. She turned over and glared at him. "She came to my wedding with old Bai. Shouldn't I slap her? You forced Mubai." He was on good terms with Lin Cece. Yi Mulin looked down at her. "I know when to stop being stubborn. I'm not as good-tempered as Mubai." Bai Shuili murmured, "Yes, you're not him. I'm in hell." Yi Mulin, I've never thought of myself as your wife. I'm your prostitute. Yes, a prostitute. Have you ever done that? That's how women are treated. Shut up. Yi Mulin's face was livid. Do you know what a prostitute is? He leaned over and whispered in her ear, I won't want your child if you're a prostitute. At that moment, Bai Shuili didn't understand what he meant. Instead, she mocked. Do you have a throne to inherit? Yi Mulin couldn't communicate with such a shallow woman. He chose to go downstairs. When he closed the door, he whispered, Come downstairs to eat later. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Go to hell. Bai Shuili threw a pillow at him, and it hit him on the waist. Yi Mulin looked at her quietly for a few seconds. He bent over to pick it up and threw it on the bed. Then he walked out. The door closed, and Bai Shuili switched on all sorts of vulgarities. But Yi Mulin couldn't hear them. As she cursed, she began to cry again. She had wanted to marry someone for many years, but in the end, she had married a demon. After a long time, she finally went downstairs. Yi Mulin was no longer at the dining table. The servants said that the young master had gone to the office. He was a complete workaholic. He worked on Sundays and seemed to spend all his time at home in bed with her. He was clearly a pervert and a madman. The magazines outside had made him look like a celibate Prince Charming. Bah! His rough style in bed was as if he had never had a woman in his previous life. Bai Shuili was eating, but she didn't have much of an appetite. She used her fork to poke at the food and looked up to ask the servant, Where's Mubai? The servant's mood was complicated. Everyone in the Yi family knew that the eldest young madam was supposed to marry the second young master, but the second young master ran away from the marriage, so the eldest young master took over. In fact, it was good enough that someone took over the eldest young madam, but now the second young master couldn't forget her. The servant hesitated for a moment before saying, Second young master, he isn't here. Chapter 32:51. Bai Shuili sneered. I was just asking casually. You seem to think that I am going to climb into his bed. But you are right. I am going to climb into Mubai's bed. Go back and tell your young master that I am a slut and it is best to tie me up with a chain. The servant lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything. Bai Shuili stretched herself. Go and tell Yi Mulin now. I'm going to find my brother-in-law to commit adultery. After that, she walked upstairs slowly. The servant hesitated for a moment and really made a phone call. On the other side, Yi Mulin was driving. He frowned after hearing the phone call. Don't worry about her. Mubai will know what to do. After that, he hung up the phone and took a cigarette from the middle control. In fact, he shouldn't care. It was just a legal fertility machine. She had liked Mubai for a long time. Mubai didn't like her. Even if she seduced Mubai, there would be nothing between them. But he was still a little upset in his heart. He couldn't tell why. Yi family's mansion. When Bai Shuili opened the door of Yi Mubai's bedroom, she was stunned. Yi Mubai was only wrapped in a short bath towel. His whole body couldn't cover anything. His body was very good. She vaguely remembered that her animal husband also had a good body. How could a person who was in the office every day have an 8-pack? Bai Shuili now remembered that he trained her every day and became more and more muscular. Putting aside Yi Mulin, she looked at Lao Bai, whom she had liked for many years. Yi Mubai put his hand on the bath towel and looked at her with a sigh. Shuili, why did you come here? Bai Shuili sat directly on his bed and looked at him. Yi Mubai, don't play dumb. You know what I want to do? Yi Mubai smiled. I will be beaten to death by my eldest brother. Didn't you say that you like me and are willing to let me be beaten to death? Bai Shuilan took off her coat and looked at him with a little temptation. He won't beat you to death. He will only divorce me. Yi Mubai stared at her bold and unrestrained manner, still standing there without moving. Actually, it was not that he did not have any feelings for Bai Shuili. They were childhood sweethearts, and he had even seen her in open-top pants. When they were young, she would always follow behind them. She also liked to stick to him, but she was extremely afraid of his elder brother. Whenever she saw Yi Mulin, she would cry. Unexpectedly, he was married now. Yi Mubai sighed softly. Surely, even if you have sex with me, Big Brother won't divorce you for the time being. He doesn't have anyone in his heart. At most, he won't touch you. It will take at least 3 to 5 years. Think about it. Are you willing? You won't touch me? Bai Shuili sneered. That's great. Bye-bye, let's do it. Instead, he picked up his clothes and ran out with them, stomping down the stairs. Bai Shuili followed him like this. The servants didn't dare to look, but they reported it to the Yi clan's eldest brother. Bai Shuili was just waiting to be peeled off at night. Yi Mubai's footsteps were very fast. He directly threw his clothes into the car and sat in it, slowly putting on his clothes. Outside the car window, Bai Shuili slammed the car door. Yi Mubai, you coward, you just don't dare. He quickly put on his clothes and rolled down the car window. Yes, I don't dare. I said that my brother will beat me to death. He paused for a moment, his face deep in thought. Surely, you and my brother have been married for a few months. Haven't you tried to understand him? As soon as he finished speaking, the corner of Bai Shuili's mouth twitched slightly. Chapter 3252. Yi Mubai wanted to close the window, but there was no way to leave now. No matter what, he was also responsible for this matter. Yi Mubai sighed and opened the door. As soon as he opened the door, Bai Shuili threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. She murmured, I know you won't leave me alone. Yi Mubai let out a long sigh. Damn it, if the servants saw this situation, they wouldn't be able to clear their names even if they jumped into the Yellow River. But it wasn't the servants who saw it, but Yi Mulin. Yi Mulin's car drove back to the Yi family's mansion. He got out of the car and leaned against the door, quietly watching them hug. Yi Mubai's hand trembled. Big brother. Yi Mulin smiled, and his eyes fell on Bai Shuili's face. Bai Shuili bit her lip and wanted to say something, but Yi Mulin just smiled, turned around, and opened the door. The car drove away quickly. He didn't scold her, nor did he hit her. He didn't do anything, but Bai Shuili felt even more uncomfortable. She unconsciously let go of Yi Mubai and lowered her head. I'll go back to my room first. Yi Mubai frowned. Shuili. She paused and turned around. Mubai, don't worry. I won't make things difficult for you. I won't let you brothers turn against each other. After saying that, she walked towards the hall. At that moment, her back looked a little lonely. Yi Mubai stopped her. Shuili, you don't care about him that much, do you? Bai Shuili paused and turned around to stare at him. Yi Mubai's voice was soft. Actually, you like my brother, don't you? No. She bit her lip. Not at all. I hate him. After saying that, she turned around and ran upstairs, so fast that it seemed that someone was chasing her. Yi Mubai's eyes were a little meaningful, and he smiled slightly. Upstairs, Bai Shuili slammed the door shut and leaned against it. The moment she closed her eyes, her mind was filled with Yi Mulin's stern and mocking expression, as well as Mubai's words. He said that she liked Yi Mulin. How could it be? How could she like such a wild and violent man? He was simply a man who had not fully evolved and was wearing the clothes of civilization. She bit her lip and convinced herself that it must be true. She would definitely not like him. She lay on the bed and pulled up the quilt to cover her face, but she could not get rid of Yi Mulin's gloomy face. Tonight, when he came back, he would definitely find a way to torture her. Bai Shuili felt that she was almost used to it. She fell asleep as she thought about it. When he woke up, it was already dark outside. The lights in the house were dimmed outside, and it was as soft as the moonlight. Bai Shuili stared blankly for a while before sitting up. The surroundings were dark and quiet. Yi Mulin hasn't returned yet? She heaved a sigh of relief and felt a little hungry, so she flipped her hair and went downstairs. At this time, it was already 8 o'clock in the evening. The Yi family's mistress was ordering the servants. She was a very gentle woman. When she saw Bai Shuili come down, she asked kindly, when the meal is ready, call Mulin and see when he'll be back. Oh, right. Mubai and your father are not eating at home. Bai Shuili could yell at everyone in the house, including the head of the Yi family, but she was too embarrassed to yell at Yi Mulin's mother because she was so gentle. However, she also felt a little strange. How could such a gentle person give birth to such a fierce Yi Mulin? Chapter 3253. Bai Shuili nodded. Okay. She was just about to go upstairs to get her phone when Mama Yi called her. Her voice was still soft. Shuili. Bai Shuili turned around. Mama Yi smiled. Let's wait a little longer. Come and chat with me. Then she walked to the sofa and sat down. Bai Shuali bit her lip and forced a smile after a long time. She followed her and sat down. Mama Yi held her hand as soon as she sat down. The motherly love shocked her. Her eyes turned red, and she looked at Mama Yi in shock and fear. Mama Yi saw her uneasiness and said in a softer tone, "I know you feel wronged. Mulan doesn't have a good temper. He's not as good as Mubai, but he has his good points. Shueli, please be more tolerant. If he bullies you, tell me, and I'll teach him a lesson." Bai Shuali didn't hit a smiling person. Moreover, Mama Yi was so kind. How could Bai Shuali say anything? She looked down and nodded. "Okay." Mama Yi smiled and patted her hand. "You haven't even called me Mom." Bai Shuali was a little stunned. Then she remembered. In fact, she used to see Mama Yi often. After all, the two families had contact, and she had always liked Mama Yi. But she was Mubai's mother at that time. After Yi Mulan got married, she unintentionally became estranged from Mama Yi and never called her Mom. She was a little embarrassed. It was a little hard to be blamed like this. Mama Yi didn't care. She patted her shoulder. "Wait a minute." She got up and went back to her room. After a while, she came out with an imperial green jade bracelet and put it on Bai Shuali's wrist. It was an excellent imperial green bracelet and was worth at least 100 million yuan. Bai Shuali was a little stunned and subconsciously wanted to withdraw, because it was obviously a family heirloom. She couldn't accept it. She still wanted to divorce Mulan, but she couldn't withdraw it no matter how hard she tried. Instead, her wrist was red. Mama Yi said worriedly, "It's just a little thing. Don't mind it so much. What if it gets hurt?" As he spoke, he raised his head and saw his eldest son standing at the entrance with a briefcase in his hand. It was obvious that he had just returned. He couldn't help but say, "Mulan, come here quickly. Your silly wife is acting like a fool." Yi Mulan's gaze went past his mother and landed on Bai Shuali's face. She was also looking at him with a guilty conscience because of the matter of hugging Mu by today. His gaze dimmed. Time to eat. He walked over naturally, put the briefcase aside, and pulled Bai Shuali towards the dining room. Bai Shuali wanted to yell at him, but she didn't dare to make a sound because Mama Yi was there. Mama Yi looked at them and smiled slightly. The relationship between this pair of children was not that bad. At least, as a mother, she knew Mu Lin's temperament very well. If he hated her, why would he come home every day? In the past, Mulan often slept in the office and stayed in the hotel when he was on business trips. Now, he slept at home for half a month. It would be a lie to say that Shirley didn't bind his heart. Mama Yi followed with a smile. After Bai Shuali sat down, she glared at Yi Mulan. He didn't care and coldly ordered the servants to start the meal. Bai Shuali snorted. "You should have come back earlier. Everyone has to wait for you when you come back so late. The kitchen staff and the dishes won't get off work until at least 10:30. Chapter 32:54. Bai Shuali was furious. "It's you? You made it so late that I don't even have the right to have a supper after spending so much energy?" Mama Yi was drinking her soup. She was a very elegant person, but now she almost spat it out. The information contained in these words was too much. She gave her eldest son a reproachful look. "Mulan, this is your fault. You want to enjoy the rights of a husband, but you can't even have a supper as a wife? When did the Yi family become so stingy?" Yes, she could see that the indifferent eldest son was very stingy with his wife, as if he was fighting with her every day. In fact, Bai Shuali did not have any particularly big shortcomings. She was just a little superficial and did not do proper work. He just needed to take care of her. With his eloquence, it was not a problem for him to coax a woman. It just depended on whether he was willing to or not. And Mulan had been sulking all the time. Mama Yi suddenly thought that maybe Mulan was angry because of the comparison with Mubai, because the person Bai Shuali wanted to marry was the second son. So the eldest was angry and used this method to gain attention. Mama Yi could not digest it and drank the soup slowly. Yi Mulan looked at Bai Shuali with an unfathomable light in his eyes. After a while, he said calmly, "If you want to eat in the future, just ask me to cook. Don't make the whole house so noisy." Bai Shuali stared at him. "You can cook," Mama Yi said softly. Mulan went to the UK to study when he was 16. He worked and took care of himself. Bai Shuili glanced at Yi Mulin. She did not know why she felt a little guilty. She was now 26 years old and had never cooked a meal. In fact, she did not know anything and did not have a job. She was just a rice worm. No wonder Yi Mulin did not like her. She felt depressed and kept eating with her eyes down. Mama Yi glanced at her son and saw that he was looking at his wife deeply. She gave him a look. Yi Mulin's expression changed slightly, but he still picked up a piece of pork leg and put it in Bai Shuili's bowl. He coughed lightly and said, "This is collagen." Bai Shuili looked up at him and gave it back to him. "I don't like it. I like it when you eat it." He gave it to her. His natural desire to control was overflowing. Mama Yi had no choice but to come out. "Mulin, do you know how to date? You can't be so rude to a young lady. She's my wife. You don't need to waste so much effort." Yi Mulin stood up and nodded slightly. "Mom, I'm going upstairs to read a document." He kissed his mother goodnight and took his briefcase upstairs. Mama Yi was a little speechless. She looked back at Bai Shuili and tried to smooth things over. "You've been like this since you were young. So annoying." Bai Shuili smiled. "He just hates me." For a moment, Mama Yi didn't know what to say, but she still took care of Bai Shuili's feelings. She was still a little uneasy until she went upstairs. Mulin was obviously angry, but she could understand. After all, Shuili had hugged Mu Bai today, which was a huge blow to the proud Mulin. It was already good enough that he only had a cold expression. She wanted to intervene, but as a mother and a mother-in-law, it was really inconvenient for her to intervene in the matter of a married couple. Bai Shuili returned to the room. Yi Mulin was not in the bedroom. Judging from the closed door of the study, he was inside. She remembered that he had seen what happened today. She felt that it was about time to lay her cards on the table. Maybe he would agree to the divorce when he was angry. Chapter 32:55. There was no response. Bai Shuili pursed her lips and pushed the door open. Yi Mulin was sitting behind the desk, smoking. He looked up when he heard the sound and looked at her deeply. Bai Shuili entered and closed the door. "What's the matter?" Yi Mulin was calm and his voice was restrained. Bai Shuili stood at the door and leaned against it. She said softly, "Yi Mulin, let's get a divorce." He did not make a sound and only smoked his cigarette quietly. Bai Shuili pursed her lips and said, "You can see that I like Mu Bai, not you." Yi Mulin glared at her. "Bai Shuili, you want to leave me, don't you?" She looked at him for a long time before replying, "Yes." He looked down and picked up the document on the table before putting it down. "Take a look at this and sign it if you agree." Bai Shuili's heart beat faster. She looked at the document and remembered that he went out today to prepare this. Yi Mulin looked at her and said indifferently, "You don't dare to look at it?" She was immediately provoked and coldly snorted, "Why wouldn't I dare to look?" She walked over and picked up the document. She looked at it and was stunned. It was different from the shameless contract they had signed previously. This time, it was much more formal. It was written clearly on the contract that they would get a divorce in 3 years. The premise was that she had to give birth to his child, and the breakup fee was 1 billion yuan. Bai Shuili looked at it and blinked. "Yi Mulin, do you think I need to sell myself?" When she said this, the Bai family was like the sun in the sky. Even the Yi family had to rely on the Bai family in certain aspects, so she had the confidence to say this. Yi Mulin smiled faintly. "You can choose not and be tied to me for the rest of your life." Bai Shuili stared at him. They had been married for a few months, and he had sex with her almost every night except during menstruation. But to a certain extent, he was still a stranger to her. Bai Shuili lowered her eyes, her eyelashes trembling slightly. Then, she tore up the document and looked up at Yi Mulin. "I know you look down on me, but I will not betray myself, nor will I have a child with you." With that, she left in a huff. Yi Mulin's gaze quietly fell behind her as he watched the door close with a bang. His originally gloomy mood actually brightened up a little, and the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. His gaze moved to the pile of documents, and he picked them up and threw them into the trash can. What a bad temper. He lit another cigarette and finished it before walking out of the study and back to his bedroom. Bai Shuili was still awake. She leaned against the headboard and painted her toenails, the bright red kind. Yi Mulin glanced at her, walked into the changing room, and took his bathrobe to the bathroom. As soon as he left, Bai Shuili looked up at his back. After the toenail polish dried, she took out a fashion magazine to read. It was the latest season of jewelry from a certain luxury brand. Basically, Bai Shuili would buy it every season. When she was engrossed in it, Yi Mulin came out. Seeing the magazine she was holding, he frowned and took it away. "You want to buy it?" "Can't I?" She took the magazine from his hand and continued reading. "I didn't use your money. The cards I use are all from my dad." Yi Mulin scoffed out coldly. "You're not keeping a low profile at all. Your dad's identity is all for you. Aren't you afraid of getting into trouble for spending a few million a month?" Bai Shuili raised her eyes and looked at him. Chapter 3256. Yi Mulin looked at her and said, "I'm afraid you don't know about the recent situation, but how do you know? What else do you know besides these things?" Bai Shuili bit her lips and stared at him. "Yes, I'm ignorant and incompetent. What's wrong with eating your rice?" Yi Mulin threw the magazine to her and didn't make things difficult for her anymore. He leaned against the bed and opened a small drawer. He took out an envelope and threw it to her. Bai Shuili was a little suspicious. She opened the envelope and saw a card inside. "Give me money to spend." She raised it and asked, "Is there 1 billion in it?" Yi Mulin sneered. "You really don't know pain." He took the card from her hand and said, "Forget it if you don't want it." Bai Shuili took it and bit her lips. "I want it. I can't sleep with you for free." Yi Mulin sneered, leaned against the bed, and lit a cigarette. She took the cigarette from his mouth and said without thinking, "You're not allowed to smoke." Yi Mulin knew something about her. She was a rice worm who was afraid of death. He didn't insist, but looked at her and put out the cigarette. He said slowly, "The upper limit of the card is 20 million. You can use the money in it if you want to buy anything. Don't spend your father's money anymore." He paused for a moment and didn't make it clear to her. The reason why he didn't go into politics was the same as Mu Bai, because they didn't want to attract attention. Their father could retire when he was in office, but if he and Mu Bai went into politics, their father wouldn't be able to get away so easily. Many people wanted to kill the Yi family, and some things that didn't show up needed money. Here Mu Bai could cover up for the Yi family in this aspect. Of course, Bai Shuili wouldn't think of these. She had nothing else to do in her WeChat moments except to show delicious food and diamond rings. He used to think it was very bad and shallow, but now he felt very happy. Ignorance is bliss. It was a saying that she was brainless. Since she didn't allow him to smoke, he didn't force her. He had to find something interesting to do. When he pressed her down, Bai Shuili was stunned and immediately resisted subconsciously. "Bastard, you clearly did it during the day." If he had 12 hours at home, at least 4 of them were spent with her. She was worried that she might lose her kidney. Yi Mulin pressed her hand down and resolutely took off her bathrobe. There was not much of an expression on his face. "Is there such a rule that if you've done it during the day, you can't come at night?" He was as rude as ever. Bai Shuili bit her lips and endured it. It was probably too painful. Tears were coming out of her eyes. She silently turned her face away, feeling a little humiliated. Coupled with the car that he had given her, she felt even more convinced that she was for sale. In the past, she would resist and struggle, but now she wouldn't, because the more she resisted, the more ferocious he would be, so she simply let him do as he pleased. Usually, he would let her go after 2 or 3 times. Seeing that she was about to cry, Yi Mulin bent down and bit the back of her ear. His voice was a little hot. "Are you uncomfortable?" Bai Shuili burst into tears and cursed. "What do you think? It hurts like hell." She struggled, and as before he held her down. Yi Mulin was a little depressed. He frowned and said, "Are you really not feeling well?" "Comfortable my ass." Bai Shuili cursed. Chapter 3257. After saying that, he lost interest in chatting and decided to fight to the end. Because of the medicine she took, he was now taking precautions. When it was over, he let out a breath and looked at the woman under him. Her nose was red, and her body was trembling slightly. She looked very uncomfortable. He didn't go to the bathroom like before. Instead, he leaned against her and touched her hair. He asked hoarsely, "What else are you not satisfied with? Did it make you uncomfortable?" Although he hadn't compared himself, he felt that he was not bad among men. She was not satisfied. Bai Shuili covered her face with the quilt. She didn't want to talk to him. He was so rough, and he still had the cheek to ask if she was uncomfortable. Not every woman would feel pleasure after being raped. Her attitude angered him again, and he pulled the blanket away. Just as he was about to vent his anger, he saw that her back was covered in bruises from the marks he had left behind, and his anger immediately disappeared. He touched it with his fingers and asked, "Does it hurt a lot?" "It hurts more inside." She sounded angry. "Yulin, you still have the cheek to say that you want a child. I've been injured many times because of this, and I'm always taking medicine. Do you think the child will be healthy?" He didn't expect her to say that. Bai Shuili looked down. "Anyway, in your heart, I'm just a tool. You don't have to think about it, and you don't have to worry about whether I'll get hurt." Yulin looked at her and asked again, "Does it hurt a lot?" This time, his voice was more or less gentle. Bai Shuili pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "It hurts a lot." Yulin sat up. "Let me see." She was stunned for a moment. No, but the light was already on. He looked at it carefully and didn't allow her to refuse. Bai Shuili was a little embarrassed. She turned her face away and gritted her teeth. "Yulin, you're a bastard." "Yes, I'm a bastard. I hate you." She breathed heavily because of his actions. He laughed in a low voice, and his chest shook. She was a little surprised, probably because he rarely laughed. He looked good when he laughed, but she felt that it was even more annoying. Yulin checked and found that there was nothing wrong with her. However, she was in pain every time and did not look like she was enjoying it. He felt that there was something wrong. If he gave a little bit so that she could be a little more content in this marriage, he was willing to try. The eldest son of the Yi family got out of bed and went to the study. Bai Shuili's heart was like a dog. This man had slept with her in the middle of the night, and he was still concerned about work? Workaholic. She kicked the quilt angrily, but her leg was throbbing in pain. She scolded him a few more times before closing her eyes to sleep. Just as she was about to fall asleep, a tall figure crept onto the bed. Then he kissed her. In the darkness, she opened her eyes wide and passively felt the entanglement of their lips and teeth. He rarely kissed her, so she rarely tasted this kind of feeling. That unfamiliar, manly scent kept drilling in her nose. No, her body. It was even more intimate and secretive than the most intimate thing. Why was he kissing her? Was there something wrong with his brain? Bai Shuili's eyes widened as she looked at the man in front of her helplessly. Chapter 3258. He kissed her from top to bottom, leaving nothing behind. She kept her eyes wide open. Her hands were originally on the pillow, but when he let go of her, she did not know where to put them. In the end, her hands gently hugged his black head, omitting 10,000 words about Boss Ye's kidney function. When it was all over, she lay on the bed, biting her lips, her fingers moving gently on the pillow. Her body felt like it had gone through a storm and was comforted by a gentle breeze. It was an indescribable feeling, a feeling that she had never felt before. It was like the first time she had sex with him. Yulin lay down, his slender fingers curling around her hair from time to time. He needed to think about how he should treat his wife. He went to the study just now to take a look. Ahem, all men like to look. As a gifted student, he quickly learned how to use it and made his wife very satisfied. He could feel a few times. But wasn't he spoiling her too much? Yulin wasn't a man who liked to spoil women. He felt that it would damage his dignity. He liked it when she was afraid of him, and he liked to control everything. But now that she was lying here so softly because he had made her like this, a pure male joy welled up in his heart. It was very contradictory. Yulin instinctively wanted to smoke again, but he hesitated because of Bai Shuili. In the end, he still smoked. When he was smoking, unexpectedly, she didn't stop him. Instead, she closed her eyes and moved her body towards him. Just like that, Yulin made a decision. After smoking, he pulled up the blanket and went to sleep. The next morning, he was probably addicted to it. Ignoring her wishes, he dragged her out of the blanket and did it again. It took a total of 2 hours. In the past, she would scold him after they were done. But now, she was very obedient and just lay there without moving. Yulin suddenly felt that it was quite interesting. It seemed that this was more satisfying than making her cry. Of course, she cried too, but this kind of crying was different. He couldn't describe it, but any man who had a woman would understand. Yulin chuckled and reached out to rub her eyes. Sleep for a while more. I'm going to work. Bai Shuili lay there without making a sound. She didn't have the energy to care about him. After a while, her lips were blocked by something soft. Those were his lips. Stunned, she opened her eyes and stared at him blankly. Yulin smiled. I'm going to take a bath. She stared blankly for a long time before she finally said, Are you sick? Yi Clan's eldest brother's face darkened at once, and he glared at her. She naturally did not dare to provoke him again, so she closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. Only then did Yulin feel better. After all, she was still afraid of him. He was about to leave, but he stopped and muttered, Don't seduce Mubai again, or I'll break your leg myself. It's none of your business. Bai Shuili turned her face away. He wanted to get angry with her, but decided against it. What was the point of arguing with this shallow woman? He went to take a shower. When he passed by the mirror, he saw his slightly raised lips and couldn't help but be stunned. He looked very satisfied, but was there really a need to be so satisfied? He purposely darkened his face, but after a while, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up after the shower. He changed his clothes and looked at her as he passed the bed. Or did he still think that she was shallow? Chapter 32:59. Bai Shuili was still asleep. Yulin went downstairs in a good mood. His mother always got up early. She looked at her son's expression and smiled. You're up so early. Did you sleep well? Yulin was used to a Western breakfast. He drank a cup of black coffee and said to his mother, Not really. Mama Yi looked at him carefully and smiled. You don't look like you didn't sleep well. Yulin, when did you become so insincere? Yulin looked down and smiled lightly. Mother Yi looked at her eldest son. In fact, Yulin's appearance was not inferior to Mubai's at all. It was just that he was too strict and people ignored his appearance. The mother and son ate quietly. After a while, Bai Shuili came down. She usually didn't sleep until noon. She was wearing silk pajamas and her hair was a little messy. She yawned and walked down. Seeing Yulin was still at home, her eyes widened. Then she looked at Yulin and said, I'm hungry. Yulin put down the coffee in his hand and looked at his wife seriously. Didn't you greet your elders so early in the morning? Bai Shuili opened her eyes wide. Did I eat your food? But she thought of the card from last night. She really ate his food. Yulin looked at her. She couldn't greet him, especially since it seemed like she was too weak in front of him. Mother Yu was very easygoing. Yulin, look at your serious face. You don't have to be so serious in court. If you go home earlier in the future, you can go out to eat with Bai Shuili. Young couples don't have to accompany me at home every day. Eat with a poker face like him? Bai Shuili refused in her heart. She immediately squeezed a smile and sat at the dining table. Mom, I like to accompany you. Mother Yi patted her little hand happily. Bai Shuili is still very good. Yulin, you can't always bully her. As a mother, she naturally saw the kiss mark on Bai Shuili's neck. She felt a little sad and happy. Her son finally got it. She was worried that her son was too insensitive before. Now it was great. Bai Shuili ate breakfast and didn't notice that Yulin smiled slightly because she said Mom. The smile was very light, just a slight twitch of the corner of his mouth. But then, he looked at her sternly. Bai Shuili, have you brushed your teeth? Bai Shuili frowned as she nibbled on her croissant. No, can't I have breakfast without brushing my teeth? She continued to eat as she spoke. Yulin glared at her. Go upstairs and brush your teeth before coming down. I don't want to. Bai Shuili bit her lip. I'm going to sleep later. Brushing my teeth now is unnecessary. Yulin snorted coldly. You can even find such an excuse, Bai Shuili. You are shallow worm. She looked at him provocatively. If you don't appreciate me, why did you marry me? She was relying on the fact that Yulin did not dare to act rashly in front of Mama Yi, so she went against him. But she really underestimated men. All men were actually the same. No matter how serious a man was, once he opened the door to a new world, he could also be very shameless. Yumulin was like this. He smiled faintly and looked at her. Do I need to admire you when I marry you? Usually, it's fine as long as it can carry on the family line. Chapter 3260. She was so angry that she didn't want to eat breakfast anymore. She put down the bread and ran upstairs. Remember to brush your teeth. I hate lazy women, he said coldly behind her. Mama Yi was stunned for a moment before she said to her son, Mulin, when did you become so calculative? Yi Mulin took another sip of coffee and said, I'm disciplining her. Shirley isn't a child. You don't have to be so strict with her. Mama Yi was still trying to persuade him. Yi Mulin just drank his coffee and didn't say anything. After breakfast, he went to the office. He was a very busy man, the kind of workaholic that by Shirley described. He liked work, and work was his focus. But now, he would occasionally think of his wife. Especially last night, when she cried and clung to him, it made him reminisce. It turned out that women could be so soft. He couldn't help but regret that he should have been gentler to her before. It was much more interesting than the simple physical fight. His secretary was astonished at his absent-mindedness, for lawyers of the night were never absent-minded when they were at work. When she took the document for Yi Mulin to sign, the secretary couldn't help but ask softly, Lawyer Yi, what's so happy about? Yi Mulin calmed himself down and looked at his secretary. He said calmly, Nothing. The secretary nodded and stood up straight. After Yi Mulin signed, she whispered, Lawyer Yi, it's my birthday today. I'll treat everyone to dinner. Do you want to come? Yi Mulin looked up at his secretary. The secretary had worked for him for several years, and her work had always been satisfactory. As his boss, he should give her face for a birthday dinner. He smiled and said, Okay. The secretary didn't expect her boss to be so straightforward. She twisted her hand and hesitated. Lawyer Yi, you can bring your family. Then she turned around and ran away. After she left, Yi Mulin realized that he had been ridiculed, but he wasn't angry. But bring Shirley. He took his phone and thought about it. She only knew how to shop and talk about beauty and fashion. She couldn't get along well with the female lawyers in his office. He still didn't call. At noon, he found time to pick a gift for the secretary. It was his birthday, so Yi Mulin wasn't stingy. He picked a bag worth more than 50,000 yuan as a reward. He wanted to go back to work immediately, but when he walked to the counter on the first floor, he saw a necklace. After standing there for about 5 seconds, the counter lady immediately came forward with a smile and said, Sir, what can I do for you? The counter ladies of these luxury brands all had discerning eyes. With one look, they could tell that Yi Mulin was rich, so their attitude was extremely warm. Yi Mulin's expression changed slightly. He walked over and pointed to the necklace. Help me wrap it up. It wasn't very expensive, but he liked the style very much. It was simple and elegant, with a 50-cent diamond in the middle. The chain was made of rainbow gold, but the craftsmanship was excellent. With such good business, the counter lady was very excited. Sir, you really have a good eye. This is a limited edition from Tiffany. It's called Gift of Love. You must be giving it to your wife, right? She glanced at the bag in his hand. The bags in the shop are also very tasteful. Your wife must also be someone with great taste. Chapter 3261. Hearing Yi Mulin's words, the counter lady became even more cheerful. She smiled even more professionally. Do you like extravagance? Our brand also has low-key and luxurious ones. Do you want to take a look? The counter lady pointed at a row of high-end models, all of which cost more than a few million. Yi Mulin didn't really appreciate them, but he still took a fancy to a 30-carat 6-clawed diamond ring and asked the counter lady to take it out. The counter lady's heart was trembling. This was the treasure of their brand. This diamond ring cost more than 80 million. There is only one in the world because it was made from the center of a South African diamond. It was dazzling. Of course, the price was also dazzling. When the counter lady was recommending it, her eyes were still a little cautious. Yi Mulin looked at it again. Wrap it up for me. The counter lady's eyes widened in disbelief. That was it? He bought it for more than 80 million. He didn't even bring a woman to try it? The counter lady was so excited that she stammered. Sir, do you want to pay by card or cash? Yi Mulin looked at her. Do you want to use a truck to transport the cash? The counter lady was incoherent. Sorry, I was just too excited. More than 80 million. She could buy a suite in a third-tier city with the commission and make a down payment in each city. God, a golden egg really fell from the sky. Soon, she finished the paperwork. When she handed it to Yi Mulin, she was a little envious. She didn't know which woman could make this man pay for it. Yi Mulin said calmly, "It's my wife." The counter lady's expression was a little dreamy. Sure enough, the best was reserved for his wife. The secretary only had a bag worth tens of thousands. Yi Mulin returned to his office and closed the door. He was not in the mood to deal with work. He took out the diamond ring and looked at it. In fact, he didn't know why he bought it. He understood the meaning of a diamond ring. It represented not only marriage, but also a promise. He frowned. His promise to buy Xueli? That shallow worm? He had always despised her. Other than her beautiful body, which gave him great enjoyment, he really felt that she had no other good points. But as a wife, especially the wife of a man like him, her beautiful body made him willing to go home early. In fact, it was her biggest advantage. Moreover, her body was very suitable for pregnancy. But can't like her so stupid, shallow. Therefore, it was better to give birth to a boy and let him teach him personally. Yi Mulin didn't realize that he was looking forward to his marriage with Bai Xueli. He decided to put the diamond ring aside for now. So he put in the drawer and threw the necklace box in his briefcase. At 6 o'clock in the evening, he got off work and called his mother to tell her that he wouldn't be back for dinner. Mommy said in a low voice that she would tell Shirley. When his mother said this, he didn't even have the slightest intention of objecting. Instead, he smiled faintly and agreed. After that, more than 20 people in the office went to the gathering. It was the little secretary's birthday, so of course, Yi Mulin wouldn't let her pay for it herself. He swiped his card, and a meal for 2 tables added up to 20 to 30,000 yuan. By the time they finished dinner, it was already past 8 o'clock. Of course, they had not enjoyed themselves to their heart's content yet. Therefore, those who had a rich nightlife recommended a bar. Everyone refused to let go of Yi Mulin, their sugar daddy, and asked him to go with them. Yi Mulin did not care. When he arrived, he tossed the bag to the little secretary from the car. Chapter 32:62. The little secretary hugged her bag and was so touched that she was about to cry. Everyone looked at her with envy. A colleague raised her hand. "It's my birthday next month, too. Lawyer Yi, please join us." Then everyone raised their hands. "We're all celebrating our birthday this year. Lawyer Yi." Yi Mulin laughed and held a cigarette. "Give everyone 100,000 yuan and buy it yourself. If I buy a bag for a female colleague, my wife will suspect that I'm having an improper relationship." His occasional jokes made the atmosphere even livelier. Everyone crowded around the rich man and went to the bar. It was late at night, and the atmosphere inside was even more intense. A group of 20 or so people picked their seats and sat down. Yi Mulin, a heavy smoker, only smoked. He didn't touch a single drop of alcohol and was extremely disciplined. His subordinates didn't care, and the female subordinates wouldn't have any feelings for him because Yi Mulin was like an insulator of gossip. He wasn't interested in women at all. Most of the time, the girls in the firm were saying that Lawyer Yi had a cold personality and that was why he didn't have a girlfriend. But Lawyer Yi's marriage was very magical. He got married with a bang. His wife was still his sister-in-law. This was a bit hard to say, but they also heard that the woman was from the Bai family. It was understandable. Lawyer Yi sacrificed himself for Yi Mu Bai. But if Lawyer Yi really had a cold personality, then did Lawyer Yi and Bai Xueli have sex for the rest of their lives? The girls looked at each other, and then a bold one asked, "Lawyer Yi, do you love your wife?" Yi Mulin frowned and took a long drag on his cigarette. He stared at them. "Why are you asking this?" "Just asking." The one who asked the question smiled and didn't dare to say another word. Yi Mulin smiled faintly. "She's quite good. She likes to stay at home with my mother. She likes tea and flower arranging. She's a very traditional girl." The young lawyers all gasped and were extremely envious. They could smell the sour smell of love. Yi Mulin felt a bit of an in his heart. But as a man, he couldn't say how shallow his wife was in front of his subordinates. even though she was very shallow. But it couldn't be denied that what he said was the truth. She did stay at home these days and was very homebody. Also, he enjoyed the envy of the female subordinates. He felt that what he said was the truth. Bai Shueli, that worm, was exactly what he thought she was. However, very soon, the high and mighty lawyer Yu was slapped in the face. Next to the steel pipe on the stage, a hot figure appeared. It was extremely hot. Her long, curly hair was spread over her delicate shoulders. Her eyes were full of charm. Her slender body was wearing a fiery red suspenders. Her skirt was so short that it barely covered her, but her pair of fair legs could make any man go crazy. She spun lightly on the stage a few times, and the audience screamed crazily. Her eyes were so charming that water could come out of them. Yi Mulin's secretary was so excited that she almost grabbed Yi Mulin's hand. God, sexy goddess. Wow, look at that leg. I can play with it for a year. Yi Mulin narrowed his eyes. His eyes were so gloomy that they were about to drip water. Of course, he knew how terrifying those legs were, because they had been wrapped around him since last night. His eyes were frozen as he stared at the damned woman on the stage. Homebody, likes tea art, likes flower arrangement. Bullshit. She was simply a dog that could not change its spots. Chapter 3263. Under everyone's gaze, Yi Mulin directly went on the stage and reached out to grab the red. Bai Shueli glared at him. So did he. At this time, Lawyer Ye's eyes were almost spurting fire, as if he was going to burn the half-exposed clothes on her body. What kind of moral thing was that? He took off his coat and forcefully put it on her shoulders. He said in a low voice, "Go back with me." Bai Shueli stared at him. No, me and my friends are having sex. His face was so gloomy. Believe it or not, I'm going to have sex with you, Bai Shueli. He quickly buttoned up the coat, but only the top was blocked and the bottom was still unprotected. The two white and tender legs were in front of everyone, almost blinding everyone's eyes. Yi Mulin really want to pick up the gun and shoot at the sky. All of you, close your eyes. His face was dark, and he dragged her outside. His legal team was dumbfounded. That was Lawyer Ye's wife? She was so beautiful and had a good figure. Didn't she say that she liked to stay at home and arrange flowers and make tea? But she clearly danced 666 on the pole. But no one dared to say anything. As long as the boss was happy. Outside the bar, Bai Shueli took off his coat and threw it on him as soon as she went out. She bit her lips. You have no right to control me. Yi Mulin's lips curled into a cold smile. Bai Shueli, don't you have any self-respect? Don't you care about your reputation? Or do you think that I like to be cuckolded? She paused for a moment and said very slowly, You are prejudiced and discriminating. There was a touch of arrogance in his eyes. Are you talking about your dress? Bai Shueli was a little hurt, and she turned around to leave. But her wrist was grabbed by him again, and his face was still dark. Do you still want to dress like this to dance for those men? Bai Shueli raised her head. Yes. The next second, Yi Mulin's expression was quite ugly. He stared at her eyes and said word by word, Bai Shueli, if you are sure, I have nothing to say. She thought that he was going to hit her, but he didn't. He just walked to his car and lit a cigarette. He seemed to be waiting for her. Bai Shueli had always been capricious. If he had forcefully dragged her home, it would not have been a big deal. However, he was undoubtedly letting her choose. If she sat in his car and went home with him, she would lose face. She bit her lip and stood there for a long time. Yi Mulin finished a cigarette and flicked the butt away. Then, he started the car and left. From the beginning to the end, he did not look at her again. She actually felt that he looked down on her and thought that she was an indecent woman. Actually, she was just an indecent woman. She just liked to play around. He could choose not to marry her. If he married her, he would torment her in bed every day. Every time she came out to play, he would despise her to death. Bastard. Why didn't he change his own shortcomings? She walked back to the bar, but did not dance again. By the time the party was over, it was already 2:00 in the night when she returned to the Yi family's old residence. Bai Shueli usually went out to play to her heart's content. Even after she married into the Yi family, she had never gone out. Today was the birthday of one of her sisters, so she went out. When she returned to the house, it was quiet inside. She carried her high heels upstairs quietly, for fear of waking up Mama Yi. What she was most afraid of was not Yi Mulin, but Mama Yi. That gentle knife was what she could not stand the most. Fortunately, Mama Yi was sleeping soundly tonight and did not come out. She walked upstairs quietly and opened the door of the master bedroom. Chapter 32-64. Bai Shuili breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, she felt a little disappointed. Then she hated herself for being so useless. Did she feel itchy if she didn't get spanked for 3 days? What a bitch. Bai Shuili removed her makeup in front of the mirror and took a shower. She was still alone in the master bedroom. When she lay on the bed, she thought that he was probably in the study. She spent the whole night in shock and fear. If there was even the slightest sign of trouble, she would think that Yi Mulin had come over to smack her, but everything in her imagination didn't happen. At dawn, she was lying on the bed. Bai Shuili suddenly sat up and thought of Yi Mulin. She immediately ran to the study. There was no one in the study, but there was a smell of cigarettes. She waved her little hand and complained, "How many cigarettes did he smoke to become like this?" But no one could answer her. She was startled and ran downstairs. Mama Yi had finished breakfast and was giving orders to the servants. She looked at Bai Shuili and said gently, "Why don't you sleep a little longer? Is it to see Mulin off?" "He's gone." Bai Shuili was stunned. "Gone?" "Yes, he's going on a business trip to Sea City. It might be a week." "Didn't he tell you?" Mama Yi laughed. "I'll talk to him later. He forgot to tell you about the business trip." Bai Shuili lowered her head and suddenly said, "Mom, it's not necessary. He doesn't tell me when he's on a business trip." After saying that, she walked upstairs. There was a little loneliness in her back. Mama Yi sighed softly. She gave birth to her son. How could she not see that her son was sulking? She didn't know why he didn't like Bai Shuili. Mama Yi always thought that he was too serious and had high expectations of Bai Shuili. This daughter-in-law had been spoiled since she was a child. She was a little spoiled, but she didn't think there was anything wrong with her. Mulin could do whatever he wanted and respected her very much. He wasn't a bad person. It was just that the Bai family didn't teach him well. Mama Yi thought to herself. But soon, she knew why her son was angry. Bai Shuili's photo with the pole was published in the mainstream media with Yi Mulin's dark expression. This was a heavy blow to the Bai family and the Yi family. Although Yi Bai suppressed it immediately, he could suppress the mainstream media, but he couldn't suppress the tabloids. Everyone knew that the eldest son of the Yi family had married a wife who loved to play around. Bai Shuili didn't dare to go out and stayed upstairs all day. She felt wronged. If she hadn't been married in the past, this kind of photo would have been nothing. Wasn't it just a little hotter? It was not a big deal to show off a little bit of his legs. However, after marrying Yi Mulin, that bastard, it seemed like she owed the whole world for this pole dance. Bai Shuili cursed in her heart, and she couldn't get through to his phone. The stingy man was obviously still angry. Bai Shuili was so angry that she decided to go out and have fun. "I really don't know what's the point of being trapped here and living like a widow every day." She had just changed her clothes, put on some makeup, and was about to go out with her bag. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Yi Mulin. He was travel-worn and didn't have much of an expression on his face. Even when he saw the clothes she was wearing, he didn't show much displeasure. He only said lightly, "Bai Shuili, let's live separately." Bai Shuili froze for a moment, and her eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she heard. When her long-awaited wish came true, she didn't feel happy at all. Chapter 32-65. She looked at him for a long time before she said something irrelevant. "How long will you be apart?" Yi Mulin glared at her and walked upstairs. Bai Shuili didn't care about the clothes on her body and immediately ran upstairs. Yi Mulin went upstairs to the study, took off his coat, and sat behind the desk. He didn't work, but tidied up his things. Bai Shuili stood at the door and saw him putting things in a big box. She asked, "You want to move out?" Yi Mulin held a cigarette and looked up at her. "You want to move out?" Bai Shuili said without thinking, "This is your house. I should move out." Yi Mulin stood up and walked straight to her. His eyes were deep, and he frowned. "Bai Shuili, you're still my wife. Before we get a divorce, you'd better not expose any scandals. Bai Shuili looked down. Yi Mulin, do you hate me? Yes. His voice was hoarse. Bai Shuili stared at him and raised the box in her hand. Didn't you buy this necklace for me? Yi Mulin stared at her. Where did you find it? She didn't answer his question, but continued to ask. I just want to ask you, did you buy it for me? Bai Shuili, Yi Mulin said coldly. Give it to me. She was dressed so skimpily in front of him. She walked to the window and was about to throw it away. Yi Mulin grabbed her and glared at her. Damn it, how dare you? I dare, unlike some people who obviously bought it for me. Why don't they dare to admit it? Bai Shuili snorted and walked to the door of the study. You want to live apart? But I'll say it first. Don't come back and climb into my bed when you're full of lust. Yi Mulin glared at this damn woman and wanted to strangle her. Bai Shuili suddenly thought of her father's words. If you can't deal with Yi Mulin, don't go home. If Yi Mulin and she were finished, no one would pay for her card anymore. Bai Shuili was not stupid. Right now, she had to coax this beastly man. She had guessed correctly. His ejaculation had been going on for a few days, so he must be bored to death. He leaned forward and placed a necklace on his neck. Does it look good? Yi Mulin looked at her, and she put the necklace around her neck. Her neck was beautiful to begin with, and the collarbone chain made it look even more slender. His anger subsided a little. He let go of her and went to pack his things. Bai Shuili bit her lip. Are you mad at me for wearing this? I'll just take it off. Yi Mulin coldly spat out a few words. Shameless. Shamelessly, she went to close the door and took off the clothes she was wearing. After kicking it off, he picked up a shirt on the sofa and put it on his body. Yi Mulin kept looking at her and realized that she was even more seductive in his shirt than when she wasn't wearing it, especially when she walked in front of him and looked up with a fawning expression. Is it okay now? Yi Mulin was still indifferent. Throw the clothes into the trash can. Oh, she replied and immediately left. She was very obedient. Chapter 3266. Let go. He was as old-fashioned as an old man. What you doing? It was Bai Shuili's first time seducing him, so she was a little nervous. After all, she was also afraid of pain. However, it was better than being kicked out of the house. She hugged him tightly, and her little hands moved down. She deliberately tried to please him. Don't you miss me at all? Yi Mulin frowned. This was really not her style. She would only call him a bastard and a beast. He stood still. His wife turned to him, tiptoed, and kissed his lips gently. Yi Mulin narrowed his eyes and looked down at her coldly. After Bai Shuili kissed him, he was still unmoved. She was a little impatient. Yi Mulin, what else do you want? It's just a steel pipe. I'm not lying on the same bed with another man. Are you done? He looked at her coldly and reached out to pull her hair. Bai Shuili had always been a little afraid of him. She lowered her voice. I'm done. Yi Mulin was still pulling her hair. His voice was very calm. Beg me to stay, beg me not to separate, beg me not to abandon you. What? Bai Shuili was stunned. Damn, this man quarreled and reconciled in such a unique way. Did he need someone to beg him? It was obvious that he was in a daze. If he wanted to do it, he had to put on this elite expression. She bit her lips. I'm not begging. If you can, then separate. Divorce. If you can, then don't touch me. As soon as she finished speaking, her body was lifted into the air. Then, they went straight to the master bedroom. She buried her face in his shoulder. There was a touch of pride on her little face. This beast really couldn't stand being teased. Yi Mulin stretched out his hand and patted her butt. His voice was a little lazy. Or beg me to do it with you. No. She lay on his shoulder and gave him a small bite. This was undoubtedly the biggest tease for a man. The eldest brother of the Yi family directly kicked the door and threw her on a big bed. They were making too much noise, kicking the door around. Mama Yi, who was downstairs, was not deaf. She was originally very worried, but when she saw her son behaving like a beast when she came up, she could not help but smile as if absence made the heart grow fonder. When he walked downstairs, he met the head of the Yi family. Mama Yi said in a gentle voice, Mulin and Shirley should have a child soon. The frequency at which he produced humans was quite high. Speaking of Shirley, Mama Yi was also at a loss for words. However, it was undeniable that Shirley was good-looking and had a good figure. She looked like a little cow. With one look, there was no need to buy toxic milk powder in the future. Mommy Yi thought about it and smiled slightly. Upstairs, Shirley was thrown onto the bed. She bit her lips and placed her feet on Yi Mulin's shoulder. Don't come over. Didn't we say that we're going to separate? What is this? A breakup party? The eldest son of the Yi family was a pragmatic type, and he had long been flirted with. After being married for a few months, her appetite had long been fattened. After a few days of not having sex, she really needed to quench her thirst. Furthermore, she had mistaken him for someone else. He took seduction as an apology. She didn't know where he got that from. He grabbed her little foot and bit it with a strong taste. She screamed. He pressed her down and said in a low voice, "Are you still going to dress like that in the future?" "Yes." With tears in her eyes, she got up and knelt in front of him. She said tearfully, "Only for you to see." Yi Mulin's anger was gone. Soon he kissed her lips. Chapter 3267. After a night of indulgence, Shirley couldn't even walk the next day, let alone dance the pole. She woke up when Yi Mulin was taking a shower. She gritted her teeth and thought to herself, it was not easy to serve as Yuan. Yi Mulin sat in the office all day long. She didn't know where he got such inhuman stamina. Beast. She hummed softly, but her hand unconsciously touched the necklace on her neck. She often bought luxury goods. Of course, she knew that the necklace was only tens of thousands, but the design was really beautiful and suitable for her. She bit her lower lip, wrapped herself in the small blanket, and ran to the mirror. She pulled her hair down and carefully admired herself. Later, she felt that she couldn't see clearly with the blanket, so she simply took the blanket and admired it carefully. She was so immersed that she didn't even notice Yi Mulin coming out of the changing room. He leaned against the door of the bathroom and looked at her, shallow. She wrapped the blanket and rolled her eyes at him. "Are you saying that the gift you chose is tacky? It's tacky to wear anything on you," Lawyer Yi said coldly. Shirley was furious. She pulled the blanket and threw it on the ground. She even stepped on it. "I'm tacky. You hugged me so happily last night." Lawyer Yi sneered. "You can't control the physiological things." Shirley was furious. She pointed at him. "I didn't want your love, didn't you?" He pulled her over. "If you didn't, why do you always stare at the gift I gave you?" He was well dressed, but she had nothing except the necklace. Her skin was rubbed by the wool fabric on his body. She felt a little rough. She couldn't help but step back, but he turned her back. Yi Mulin leaned forward and whispered in her ear, "You seduce me and want to run away?" She stared at him. Her leg was still hurting. He was a beast. Yi Mulin smiled. "You started the fire yourself. Put it out." He sat on the small sofa. His intention was very obvious. As long as she served him well, he didn't mind what method she used. Shirley's heart cursed. He was really shameless. She didn't want it. She immediately ran away, but she still couldn't escape. Yi Mulin stretched out his hand, and she sat on his lap. He held her waist and treated her shamelessly. How could she be his opponent? Very quickly, he had his way with her. The eldest brother of the Yi clan was always very involved in this kind of thing, but Shirley had enough. She was so full that she almost vomited. She lay down lazily and let him do whatever he wanted. At that moment, the phone in his pocket rang. Her body relaxed, and she felt that she could finally relax. However, Yi Mulin picked up the phone with one hand and held her waist with the other. He spoke to the other side of the phone in a warm voice. It was his secretary, because he had an appointment with a client, and he was late for the first time. It was also because of women. Yi Mulin's voice was low, hoarse and low. "Tell them I'm stuck in a traffic jam." After the young secretary took the bag, she was especially loyal. She sweetly said okay and hung up the phone. Shirley bit her lips. "Yi Mulin, why don't you go to work? Why are you always pestering me?" He bit her lips, and his voice became even hoarser. "Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Shallow, you don't even understand this." Shirley bit hard on his shoulder. "You're really fresh and refined to find such an excuse for your lust." Chapter 3268. Lawyer Yi wasn't angry, but he didn't let her go either. After one time, he left her directly without a hug or anything else. He took off his pants and went to work. Bai Shuili lay on the sofa, drawing circles with her little hands. After a while, she reached out and touched the necklace on her neck. Suddenly, she laughed foolishly. Downstairs, when Yi Mulin went downstairs, his parents were all there. Especially Father Yi. Long Ma watched his eldest son go downstairs energetically. He coughed lightly. "You got up at this time?" Yi Mulin looked at the watch and smiled lightly. "I have a client." "I'm in a hurry, Dad." Father Yi was very dissatisfied. "You don't even have breakfast? You're not a proper person after getting married." Mother Yi also said, "Yes, Mulin, your father is right. Although it's time for you to work hard on your career, you should also pay attention to your health. You can't skip breakfast." Yi Mulin paused and looked at his parents. "I'm already full upstairs." After all, Mother Yi was a woman. She didn't have so many cunning thoughts. She said with a straight face, "Nonsense, Aunt Gue didn't send breakfast upstairs." But the Yi family's head was a man. Although he wasn't proficient in these affairs, he had seen them. But this unfilial son dared to talk nonsense in front of his own mother. So he shouted, "Get out!" Yi Mulin left. He went to the company in a good mood and met the client first. After sending the client away, he took out the diamond ring from the drawer and looked at it thoughtfully. His secretary Li Mi came in and looked at the big diamond ring in her boss's hand. She said with some envy, "Lawyer Yi, this must be for Mrs. Yi, right?" Yi Mulin looked at the little secretary, frowned, and asked slowly, "Is it beautiful?" The little secretary nodded immediately. "Mrs. Yi is very beautiful." "I mean this diamond ring?" Yi Mulin corrected. The little secretary's eyes moved to the diamond ring, and her eyes were a little dull. Then she said blankly, "Of course, it's more beautiful." Yi Mulin was silent for a long time, and then whispered, "Is it too easy for her if I forgive her so easily?" The little secretary was stunned, and then said lightly, "Is it about pole dancing?" Lawyer Yi looked straight at her. The little secretary coughed lightly and whispered, "Lawyer Yi, actually, pole dancing is not what you think it is. It's actually an art. If you really want to dance well, you have to put in a lot of effort." She gestured. "For example, if you want to hang on a steel pipe, you have to use your skin to rub against it. It's normal to shave off a layer of skin during practice." Yi Mulin frowned. He remembered that Bai Shuili did not have any injuries on her body, which meant that she had learned it very early. He had been naughty since he was young. Lawyer Yi thought. The little secretary added, "Nowadays, many places are training pole dancing. It's very popular." Lawyer Yi, although you're much older than Mrs. Yi, you can't be biased. Yi Mulin narrowed his eyes and glared at his little secretary. "Am I that old?" The little secretary had always been afraid of him. But this time, she plucked up her courage and said, "Lawyer Yi, there is a 3-year-old generation gap. You and Mrs. Yi have a 3-year-old generation gap." The little secretary's voice was getting softer and softer because Lawyer Ye's face was getting uglier and uglier. Then, the little secretary ran away. Chapter 3269. But thinking of last night's charm and this morning's wildness, he felt that it was not bad. They were obviously in tune with each other. Where was the generation gap? Yi Mulin looked at it for a long time and finally put the diamond ring into his briefcase. Then, when he was working, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He got off work early in the afternoon and walked out at 6 o'clock. Everyone was shocked. Lawyer Yi, was he possessed by something? Lawyer Yi, who didn't work overtime, was abnormal. Something was wrong, but there were also male colleagues who laughed. "I have such a beautiful wife, and I don't work overtime every day." Someone was not convinced. Lawyer Yi has been married for a few months. She also worked overtime before. She was reserved before, but now she has opened the door to a new world. Someone laughed. Lawyer Yi probably endured for many years. Then, everyone laughed warmly. Actually, with such a beautiful wife, which man didn't want to go home early? Yi Mulin went back early, but Bai Shuili wasn't there. Only Mama Yi was directing the servants to prepare dinner. Seeing him come back, she was a little surprised. "Mulin, Why are you so early today? Yi Mulin smiled and hugged his mother. Nothing happened in the office. Mama Yi looked at him with a teasing look, then smiled and said, Shueli went to eat with her friends. Don't worry, it's a proper restaurant this time. Nothing will happen. Yi Mulin paused. She asked Mom to tell me? Mama Yi smiled. She told me, Mulin, although Shueli has a lot of problems, she respects the elderly and is a good girl. Don't be mean to her when she comes back. Yi Mulin also smiled and didn't say anything. He went upstairs to take a shower, changed into home clothes, and went downstairs to accompany his mother. But Mama Yi could also see that her son was a little absent-minded. She joked, Your heart has flown away? Actually, it wasn't strange. Men were all lustful. Although her son was outstanding, Shueli was good-looking and had a good figure. It was normal for a young couple to love each other. Mama Yi suggested, Why don't you call Shueli and pick her up when she comes back? It's very chaotic outside now. It wouldn't be good if she accidentally took an online car and got into danger. Yi Mulin thought for a moment and nodded. I'll call after 8. Mama Yi was very pleased. They had dinner alone. Yi Mulin went upstairs to make the call, and the phone rang for a long time before he got through. He stood on the balcony and said fiercely, You've been out for so long. When are you coming back? On the other side, Bai Shueli seemed to be drunk. Her voice was a little intermittent. Who are you? Yi Mulin's face was completely black. He knew this woman couldn't be trusted. It was only one day, and she showed her. For a married woman to drink like this outside, what kind of person would that be? He suppressed his anger. Where are you? Bai Shueli blinked her eyes. After a long time, she smiled softly. In tavern heaven on earth. He cursed under his breath, and then his voice became colder. Let the person next to you answer the phone. Bai Shueli's voice was intermittent. It was a mess on the other side of the phone. After a while, the phone was transferred to the hands of a drunkard. However, the drunkard clearly stated the restaurant's address. Man, and immediately of a coat, and wearing. Chapter 3270. Mama Yi smiled and said, Drive carefully. Yi Mulin nodded and went to the garage to pick up a Land Rover Aurora. The headlights were turned on, and the car drove out of the mansion. When they arrived at the restaurant, Bai Shueli was already drunk. There were 5 or 6 people gathered, but only one girl was sober, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She looked at Yi Mulin and said carefully, Shueli is drunk. Are you taking her home? Yi Mulin nodded and didn't hug the drunk girl. Instead, he kicked her and said, Let's go home. The girl opened her eyes wide and looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. Was this Sister Shueli's husband? How could he be so rude? Sister Shueli's legs must have been bruised from that kick. She swallowed hard. At this time, Yi Mulin looked at the drunk cats and frowned. Do you need help? The girl couldn't have asked for more. She was worried about how to get these drunkards back. Yi Mulin took out his phone and called his 2 assistants, asking them to come over. After hanging up, he finally remembered his wife and picked her up with a disgusted look on his face. Bai Shueli lay in his arms and frowned. Who are you? Why are you hugging me? Then, she started to punch and kick him. Let go of me, you lecher. Silverrod. Yi Mulin patted her, but with a pale face, and said in a tense voice, Behave. He carried her and walked to the parking lot outside and threw her into the car. Bai Shueli lay on the ground for a long time before she got up. She looked around in the darkness and felt dizzy. Where am I? Who am I? Handsome, who are you? She couldn't recognize Yi Mulin because he was wearing a pair of glasses. She waved her little hands and then smiled. Let me tell you, don't even think about having a night with me because my husband is very fierce. She stretched out her leg. I can kick you away with one kick. Yi Mulin's face darkened. He grabbed her leg and pressed it down. He leaned over and bit her neck. Do you want a night? Bai Shueli giggled. I don't want to. His anger subsided a little. Why? You don't dare? Bai Shueli lay on the bed, her eyes bright and charming. Because my husband is amazing. As she spoke, she laughed again. Her unrestrained look made him so angry that he wanted to strangle her. However, the words that came out of her little mouth were very effective. Yi Mulin adjusted his glasses and stared at her. Bai Shueli reached out and grabbed his collar, gently pulling him closer. Her expression was especially charming. But I think you're pretty good too. Do you want to try? She leaned in and kissed his lips. Do you know why I'm attracted to you the most? Yulin looked at his wife with a dark expression. Bai Shuili chuckled and moved closer. Your nose is very big. He simply wanted to strangle her to death. How could she say something like that? Shameless. He glared at her. Bai Shuili was still smiling happily. I want to see if compared to my husband, her little hand reached over, but Yulin held her down. His face was dark. Bai Shuili, your voice is similar. Bai Shuili glared at the man in front of her and then took off his glasses. She was stunned. Yulin's face was cold. I'll break your legs if you drink again. Chapter 3271. Yulin stopped her instinctively. Bai Shuili widened her eyes and pointed at her lips, but they still didn't have a tacit understanding. In the end, she vomited all over his body and the car, and the sour smell was everywhere. Yulin wanted to strangle her. After vomiting, Bai Shuili sobered up a little, but she knew how to play dumb. Yulin had been a noble since he was a child. So how could he stand such a smell? With a dark face, he asked the chauffeur to drive the car to the car wash. He took off his coat and threw it into the garbage bin, then carried his wife to a hotel nearby, in the 5-star presidential suite. When they arrived at the suite, he threw her on the carpet and rushed to take a shower. As he showered, he gritted his teeth, thinking about how to deal with her when he came out. When he came out, he put on a white bathrobe and walked over. His wife was lying on the floor, hugging a pillow in her hands, obviously asleep. He kicked her, but she didn't move, still lying on the floor like a dead pig. She didn't sleep well and was snoring. Yulin snorted and ignored her. He walked to the sofa in the living room, sat down, and turned on the TV. After watching for a while, the pig with the surname Bai was still lying there, motionless. He pretended not to see it and didn't think about it. After watching for a while, he heard a voice from the other side. I'm thirsty. The eldest son of the Yi family turned off the TV and walked over to stand in front of her. He looked down at her and said coldly, Aren't you very capable? Continue to drink. Bai Shuili opened her eyes, and her black eyes opened a slit. To be honest, she was usually beautiful, and he was used to seeing all kinds of beautiful women, so he wasn't very tempted. He just felt that her body was very good when he did that thing at night. He wasn't tempted by anything else, but he disliked her for being so superficial. But when she looked at him with her eyes open, he felt that she was a little cute, like some kind of small animal, a little pure. He squatted down and pulled her hair. Do you want to drink water? She still looked at him like that and said honestly, I want a drink. His face immediately darkened again. Originally, he wanted to leave, but that shallow, shameless woman actually moved her head over and forcefully placed it on his lap, as if she was acting coquettishly. Yulin's face was cold. What are you doing? Thirsty. Her voice was coquettish as she moved her face closer. Or I'll kiss you and drink your saliva. His expression became even more unsightly as he said in disdain, The stench is overwhelming. Don't even think about it. Bai Shuili didn't care about his disgust and kissed him. Of course, it didn't smell good, but the eldest son of the Yi family, who was born with a slight obsession with cleanliness, didn't push her away and let her kiss him for a long time. After a long time, he said with a cold expression, Are you done kissing? She giggled and rolled in his arms. After a while, she moved closer to his ear and said warmly, I don't want to eat anything else. Yulin, why are you so excited? His body stiffened and he pushed her away. He also saw his sorry state. He actually had a reaction to a filthy, smelly woman. He must be crazy. Bai Shuili was lying on the floor, gnawing on her little finger. It's only been one night, and you're already suffocating? Yulin, you're a pervert. His expression was very ugly. He wanted to kick her a few times, but he really wanted it. After weighing the pros and cons, he picked her up and walked to the bathroom. Chapter 3272. He carried her back to the bathroom and turned on the faucet while pressing her head down. And he was washing her with cold water, not caring about her life at all. Bai Shuili was clear-headed for a moment. She felt that if she believed that he loved her now, she would be out of her mind. He was clearly a despicable tyrant. He would never be gentle to her and would only hit her. He would only use violent methods to treat her. Why did she think that he liked her just a little bit just because of a stupid necklace? A stupid necklace that didn't even have $100,000? Bai Shuili screamed. Yi Mulin, I hate you the most. Let go of me. Yi Mulin sneered and continued. Bai Shuili, I hate drunkards too. I hate them very much. He didn't show any mercy to her. He washed her with cold water and washed her hair several times with shampoo. He also applied shower gel on her body and forced her to brush her teeth twice. She had to admit that Yi Mulin was a man with a sense of ceremony. He was so hairy that it made one's hair stand on end. When Bai Shuili was thrown onto the bed, she tore off the necklace on her neck and revealed her original face. She shouted, Yi Mulin, I'm so pretty and I have a rich family. Do you think that I'm worthless after spending less than $100,000 on you? She hugged him immediately. Do you think I'm that worthless? She didn't want to listen to him. She resisted fiercely. Yi Mulin pressed her down and bit the back of her ear. He said angrily, Bai Shuili, do you think you're for sale? She bit her lip and looked at him provocatively. Yes, I like to sell. It's too cheap. I won't sell it. She curled up and looked like she wasn't going to cooperate. Actually, he could have used brute force. Her little strength was nothing to him. But Yi Mulin didn't want to do that. He pressed her down with one hand and took out a diamond ring from his pocket with the other. It was so big that it sparkled and sparkled. It was so cute. Bai Shuili's eyes lit up. She reached out to take the ring and put on her finger. She looked at him with sparkling eyes. You bought it for me? Yi Mulin sneered. Not for you. It's for sex. Bai Shuili was still admiring the jawbone in her hand. She loved it so much that Yi Mulin was furious. He frowned and glared at her fiercely. Shallow. She wrapped her arms around his neck and exhaled. Lawyer Yi, you've used a ring worth tens of millions to buy sex, and you still have the nerve to say that I'm shallow. He glared at her, trying to be as rude as possible. She had always been rebellious, but tonight, she was more crazy and indulged him. Because of the big diamond ring. For the entire night, the eldest son of the Yi family pinched his wife and said harshly, You shallow woman. But no matter how much he hated her, he still pressed her down again and again, as if he wanted to earn back the money from the ring. This hateful woman. He obviously hated her. He obviously despised her for being superficial and lacking in substance. Any random woman by his side would be much better than her. But he had married her. Yi Mulin spent the whole night tormenting her and only let her go when the sun rose. Bai Shuili felt that he must be crazy. Also, he didn't use protection. Would they have a child? But she was floating and sinking. Not only was she tortured, she was also bewitched by him. She forgot to remind him to wear it. She even thought that if she was really pregnant, she should just give birth. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.